is on managing personal and professional ups and downs while managing a business. The presentation will be available shortly after the event, and feel free to leave questions in the chat beneath the live stream. With that, I would like to introduce our presenter today, David Johnson. David is founder and managing partner of Abraxas Group, a boutique advisory firm focused on providing transformational leadership to middle market companies in transition. Over the course of his career, David has served as a financial advisor and interim executive to dozens of middle market companies. David is also a Chicago Booth graduate, class of 2010, and we're thrilled to have him here today to present to you. So with that, I will let David take it from here.
Nima, thank you so much, and thank you to all the members of the Polsky Center team. I'm excited to share this presentation today. There we go. Let's jump right in. Today, we're going to be chatting about managing the personal and professional roller coaster that is the life of a business leader or entrepreneur. So let's jump in. I like to open my presentations with a quote, and I think this one is particularly apt for the moment we find ourselves in. In the coming weeks and months, we are all going to face personal and professional challenges that the coronavirus represents. There is nothing we can do to prevent that. But we do have control over how we face those challenges. As I reflected on how best to manage the life of an entrepreneur or a business leader, I gravitated to a three-point approach. Acceptance is rooted in the humility of knowing that there will be ups and downs coming to terms with that reality. It's not a failure. It's not bad luck. That is just life. Awareness is a challenge to all of us to stay true to our own ambitions and not to substitute the ambitions of another. And preparation is based on the understanding that while we cannot dictate events, we can steer them through careful planning and versatile execution of those plans. It is no exaggeration to say that the severity of the downturn that we now face is without parallel in the living memory of most of the world's population. Experts may differ about the scope of the economic devastation that the coronavirus pandemic will release, but the emerging consensus view is that the United States is on the front end of economic devastation greater than what we faced in the Great Recession. The ripple effects of this dislocation are going to be profound. We cannot necessarily say where this is going, although we can already see the depths that we've hit, and we know that there is further down to go. As I step back, one of the things that jumps out at me is just how jarring, how quickly things have turned. 2 months ago, we were celebrating the longest post-war boom in United States history. And in the past 3 weeks, we've seen a total of 17 million initial jobless claims. Some of the economist reports I'm reading recently are indicating that we could lose a total of 30 million jobs in this downturn. It's important in managing ups and downs to acknowledge that we are now in a down period. We don't know the duration, but we have a sense of the intensity. The economist John Maynard Keynes coined the term animal spirits to capture the way that emotions feed into economic decision-making. Downturns are marked by increasing skepticism and risk aversion, especially among capital providers. That would be your lenders and your equity investors. In boom times, there's a function and a focus on growth as a top priority. Capital is abundant and available on attractive terms. Profitability is not essential, especially if the growth rate is high enough. In downturns, everything flips. Growth expectations are moderated. Capital is scarce and the terms can be onerous. And profitability is absolutely essential. And if a company is not currently profitable, there has to be a clear path to profitability. In a downturn, companies seize the initiative by carefully husbanding their resources. Focus on profitability and cash flow, cultivate your relationships with capital providers and your stakeholders, keep those who are already on your side close, and steadily build out your network of relationships. Those are your force multipliers in the world. It is vital to anyone managing a business during the downturn to appreciate that the players may be the same, but the mindset will and has changed, often dramatically. Expect hard questions, expect more onerous terms, and expect tighter controls from people that were formerly enthusiastic to give or lend money. I know this picture is famous, but I have always enjoyed it. It's important focusing on the life of a small business leader or entrepreneur to understand that obstacles and setbacks are inevitable. You have to give yourself permission for that nonlinear path because that is what your path is going to look like. The idea of an uninterrupted ascension up some ladder of success is appealing, but it has little basis in reality. Most success stories are messy, and only later are the rough edges sanded away, fueling the belief of another generation of entrepreneurs in some effortless story of success. We have to appreciate that these obstacles and setbacks are part of the process and in some way are the barrier that separates our ultimate success and makes it so special. I think about tenacity a lot when I think about small business and when I think about the challenges of managing in a downturn. And I define tenacity here as the quality or fact of continuing to exist. Persistence. It's that stubborn trait of so many entrepreneurs, business leaders, artists, and intellectuals. A refusal to give in, a refusal to quit combined with talent and effort increases the likelihood of a positive outcome almost immeasurably. Many of the most accomplished people in our society, academics, business leaders, entrepreneurs, intellectuals, and politicians, have benefited from a dogged pursuit of their own personal definition of success. Tenacity does not ensure success, but it does increase your odds. The two people pictured here are chosen in part because they show two very different faces of success, but two remarkable success stories. T. Boone Pickens, who rose to prominence as a corporate raider in the 80s, in the late 90s, he was managing a hedge fund that was down 90%, down to his last $2.7 million from an original $36 million. Pickens stayed focused on what he was doing, and the natural gas futures that he invested in over the next 12 months led to a $250 million gain. Charles Bukowski, the individual on the right, quit writing multiple times when he was young, but he stuck at it. He labored in obscurity, writing for underground newspapers, and his first novel was not published until he was almost 50. But when he died, he had authored over 40 books of prose and poetry, and he is today regarded as one of the best and most accomplished American authors of the 20th century. Both of these people, and so many others, benefited from that stubborn refusal to quit, combined with a certain knowledge that what they had was special and they would find a way to share it. It's important when we think about the ups and downs that we're facing in this market to think of ways that we can slow down. Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates was famous for twice a year taking a think week. He would find a cabin in the woods. He would gather all of the reading material he could, some of it very esoteric, and he would read 18 hours a day for a week straight. Gates later credited this practice with some of his most insightful business aha moments. And while the idea of taking a week off in the woods may sound like a luxury to many of us, giving yourself time to reset is a proven means of shifting perspective, fostering creativity, and maintaining a high energy level. As you can see, I'm fond of quotes. I like this one by Coach Lou Holtz because it forces on us a certain level of humility. None of us are ever as good as we seem to be when we win. And we're never as bad as we feel when we lose. It's easy when you're up to ignore that quote and only cling to it when you're down. But the discipline is to use it throughout life. On bad days, we're better than our worst selves. And on good days, we're not quite as good as we'd like to think we are. And holding to that, we become better people for our personal relationships, and we become better business leaders. Having a plan to win is something that over my 20-year career working with companies in transition, it has struck me is entirely too rare. Many times companies in crisis, they try to survive. There's a temptation to live day to day. Surviving isn't thriving. It's important if you want to survive and if you want to get through times such as the times we're living in, that you embrace versatile strategic planning. Plan to win and be prepared to change course as needed. When I talk about an assessment, I'm not talking about a formal consulting assessment. I'm talking about the internal assessment that a business leader or a person does with themselves. What is my goal? What does success look like for me? What are my strengths and how do I want to capitalize on them? And what are my weaknesses and how do I bolster or defend those areas? Understanding the importance of your stakeholders is also crucial. Your employees, your critical vendors, friends and family, and other stakeholders, near or far, can be invaluable force multipliers for your plan. Remember that you don't have to do it all yourself, and actually you shouldn't. I would expect that many of you today are thinking about capital availability. I know many small business leaders are. If funding is a constraint, think how you can maximize internally generated funds. How do you minimize the amount of money that you need? Working to control your own destiny as much as possible is going to be crucial in this downturn, especially since we don't have a great sense of just how deep this is going to be or how long. Work to control your own destiny as much as possible. Focus on running your business during the downturn, not on pitching. And always remember, tactics should follow strategy, never dictate them. Be rigorous in your assessment of yourself and your company, build relationships, and secure the resources you need for your plan. There are a few bigger Frank Herbert fans out there than me, and that's saying something, given that he's a little popular in the University of Chicago. I love this quote: any road followed precisely to its end leads precisely nowhere. Embrace strategic flexibility when you're planning. Understand success can take multiple forms. If you're growing your business, selling might be the best outcome at a certain point. Understand what your risk tolerance is, and understand that your path is yours alone. Deviations from a path, even a path set by you, are to be expected. Check in with yourself periodically to ensure that your goals are aligned with your risk tolerance. Be versatile and opportunistic. A doctrinaire approach to strategy can lead to missed opportunities, and often does. We don't have the ability to control the coronavirus, the economic climate, or the increasing risk aversion of capital providers or even customers. We have to focus on the things that we can control. But we also have to be willing to act decisively and willing to change course when facts dictate that we should. Companies and leaders that today invest, and I'm not talking about financial investments, I'm talking about investments in time and mental bandwidth, in reporting and analysis, build informational advantages in their businesses. I think this is one of the greatest overlooked opportunities in small businesses. Every business has at its disposal a wealth of data. Understanding and simply reporting on simple things, the reason you didn't hit your budget last month, or the reason that you were over 20%, where you were over, where you were under, and why. Collectively, those things give you actionable insights into your business. You get smarter over time, continually digging a deeper and wider moat around your business as you learn more about the market, as you absorb more market signals internal to your business and external from the market, and make yourself stronger and more versatile because of those signals. We can seek out opportunities to act with speed and resolution when those opportunities present themselves, and we can continue to build advantages, especially the advantages of this type of virtual data-driven cycle. I like to talk about this simple adaptive framework as something that is equally applicable for managing the personal and the professional. It starts with assessing your own capabilities. Next, observe the changes in the environment. Plan your strategic approach, execute your plan, and adjust as needed. This framework allows entrepreneurs and business leaders to create their own virtuous cycle. Each revolution allows a leader to become more insightful and a business to become more formidable. As far as my background, because you have been generous enough with your time, though I'm not done. As Nima mentioned, I am founder and managing partner of Abraxas Group. I have spent my career, 20 plus years, driving organizational change, currently focused as an interim executive to small and mid-sized companies in transition. I have a lifelong commitment to thought leadership. I have numerous speaking engagements to my credit and a number of articles on the topics of business transformation, change management, performance improvement, restructuring, turnaround, and value creation. I cut my teeth early in my career in the downturn of 2001, 2002, and then I got out of business school just in time for the Great Recession. I've seen a lot of industries absolutely overwhelmed, but I've also seen great businesses survive these downturns, and I've seen talented business leaders and entrepreneurs become legends through using these challenges, internalizing the lessons that the market is giving them, and using it to make them better leaders and better entrepreneurs. We are facing our generation's crucible, but there is an opportunity in this moment to make collectively our companies better, make ourselves better partners at home, make ourselves better leaders in our companies and better business leaders in the wider world. And that is exactly the opportunity set that gives me hope today. My heart goes out to all of the people that are suffering, but I know from past experience that the businesses and the business leaders that buckle down throughout this downturn, many of them are going to come out stronger and positioned to lead the next boom. It looks like I might have miscalculated on my time, but Nima, if it's okay with you, I think I'm ready for questions.
Sure. Thank you, David. I appreciate a lot of what you covered today. And I think some of the things that you touched on, which I believe really resonate, is focusing your attention on what you can control.
Sure.
So I know many of our small business owners and entrepreneurs are struggling with, how do you think about these times when so much of it is not in your hands? Can you talk a little bit more about sort of some of what you covered around strategic flexibility?
Sure.
And some tactics around that for these for small business owners and entrepreneurs?
Absolutely. And that feeling of powerlessness is something that every entrepreneur, every business leader has wrestled with. It's a demon that doesn't go away. The opportunity, though, is to step back and realize all the things that you do control. You do control the business that you're in. You do control your level of understanding of your business, understanding what your unit economics are, understanding what the key drivers of your business are, how you are choosing to go to market. Do you go to market with excellent customer service? Or you a little rough around the edges with customer service, but there's operational excellence? Do you have a specific niche? Do you have a technology-enabled play on the market? There are so many ways to go at things. Entrepreneurs and business leaders are often blind to just how much they control. You control the field you're stepping out on. You don't necessarily control what happens when you step out onto the field, but you're the one who's stepping out into it. You control all of that preparation. Getting to the point about strategic planning, the overriding temptation in moments of crisis like this is for business leaders and their teams to say, we can't invest the time in planning. We just have to survive. I have to get through today. I have to get through tomorrow. And unfortunately, that doesn't get you anywhere. Yes, you certainly need to survive. That's what Tenacity is all about. But you have to have a plan to win. And even if your plan to win includes some short-term pain, there needs to be a positive plan to get beyond the pain. And that's where you get back to, you fight on ground of your own choosing. Are you choosing the right ground? And if you are choosing the right ground, do you understand what set of advantages are going to put you in the best light and create a competitive advantage for yourself? Do you understand your resource constraints, and does your plan still work in light of them? I think that so many of those pieces are intertwined and almost subconscious for an entrepreneur, that they don't take the time, they don't build in the quiet time to kind of think through it, and it's all kind of half in their head while they're going through this crisis mindset. But you have to formalize it. It doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out process, but a plan in a moment of crisis is a wonderful thing. And putting off planning until the crisis ends is presuming something that I don't know about the crisis, and most economists that I read about don't know either. We don't know where it's going, when and how it's going to end. So develop a plan now on the premise that that plan is still going to be valuable when you get it finished. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that does. That's incredibly helpful and insightful, and actually touched on some of the questions that were coming in while you were talking. And I think you addressed this, but I just, to iterate how I think people are feeling, someone had asked, how do you choose what to focus on when you're feeling overwhelmed? And I think you prompted with some questions to ask yourself, and really, as you mentioned, entrepreneurs and small business owners are often it's like ingrained in their subconscious,
right,
to like pause and really think about some of this stuff, because it is overwhelming right now and hard to focus.
It absolutely can be. I think that as a serial entrepreneur myself, I would always say that you shouldn't try to do everything yourself. And in terms of how to think about what things to focus on, you can almost think of it as your own bandwidth portfolio. If you are expending all of your mental bandwidth on the issues of today, you're not making any forward-looking investments in being any better tomorrow. You're just surviving to have another lousy day. So you need to carve out time and effort to make sure that you are planting the seeds for a better day to come, because someone else is.
And that actually ties into another question that we had. So could you illustrate how to cultivate the mindset of a thriving business? Given the situation is so unpredictable, I think you were sort of getting at that. Can you, it's, someone said it's hard to not live in the idea of surviving day to day.
Right. It is. As much as my time and my education at Booth has been a great help to me, I think that my time as an undergrad history major may have served me equally well because I have a near bottomless store of anecdotes. Steve Schwartzman, when he and Pete Peterson first formed Blackstone in 1985, they went months without their first client. So here you have a senior executive at a bulge bracket firm who's now broken off on his own, and a former Secretary of Commerce. And they're calling on the same companies that would routinely hire them for M&A engagements when they worked at Shearson Lehman, and no one would give them the time of day. It took those 2 months, and they burned through half of the capital that they had allocated for their startup before they got their first engagement. And it was a small one. And I reflect on that because it illustrates no matter how accomplished we are all going to have humbling moments. And we are in the midst of a collective humbling moment. But that doesn't need to break us. There's an opportunity to use what's going on to make us stronger and to be objective and try to glean insight from the challenges that we're having. If my supply chain is breaking, part of that is certainly due to the coronavirus and the larger economic dislocations. But part of that also might be a reflection on the fact that I didn't manage those relationships as well as I could have. I can't fix the coronavirus. I can fix being a better partner with my suppliers, though.
Yep.
So I focus on that, and I leave the other things to someone else.
Thank you. I think, that touched on a little of what this next question asks, which is around how does creating a strategic plan in a time of crisis, how might that be different than a regular strategic planning or during a normal time?
That's a great question, and it's one near and dear to my heart. As someone who's spent a lot of time in business transformations and turnaround, I'm very accustomed to building and executing plans that are at their core strategic, but are meant for rapid implementation. And I think that's the difference in this situation. This is not necessarily, this is not an overly formal exercise. This is about having an understanding and putting down on paper an understanding of your business and your market with an eye toward implementing this plan. You're not trying to impress your boss. You're not trying to impress investors. You are trying to give yourself a roadmap to success. And I think that's the difference. Now, ultimately, if you do work for someone else, this will impress your boss. If you do have investors or you're looking to court them, this is a document that they'll look to. But first and foremost, you need to look at it as your own internal roadmap. This is how my company wins. And it's not detailed down to the nth degree, but it's detailed enough that it gives me a direction, it gives me a goal, some measurable outcomes. I understand where I stand and where I believe my competitors stand, how I'm going to compete. I know what success looks like, and I know how I'm going to measure myself.
Do you see those things changing, or I suppose if I was listening to that, I would say, some of those things I don't know. How do I fill in those blanks if I don't know if my competitor is going to be there tomorrow?
That's fair. I think that in this environment, we all have to get comfortable with some things that we never really knew all that well anyway, but thought we did. Mm-hmm. I don't know about you, but in February, I just took for granted that restaurants were always open. I live in the West Loop. They were always there. That was a bad assumption. I think, though, the mental discipline of parsing out those implicit and explicit assumptions is crucial. Mm-hmm. you don't necessarily know which set of your competitors may go out of business, but you should assume that no one is going to cede you an entire market forever. You should assume that you're going to have competition. You should assume that if you must have some supply inputs, you should assume that those relationships are going to be key, though you can do things to increase your relative negotiating leverage. So focus on what you know and be clear about the things that are guesses. I think my market will look like this. I think my Chicago area market is going to go from 50 million to 100 million in X segment. I don't know if it is, but that's my operating assumption. And from there, I can build another series of assumptions that leads to my plan. I think too often, the type A personality that jumps into small business entrepreneurship or leadership roles wants to get everything right. And some of these things are unknowable at the time. You only know in retrospect if you were right. So make a reasonable, fact-based assumption and move on. It's the best you can do.
Yep. I think you're absolutely right. It's the again, so much of what you touched on, getting comfortable with the unknown and focus on what you can control. Similarly, I think, people had asked if you had any recommendations on ways to discover new opportunities within your industry during a crisis, and how do you uncover gems? You talked a little bit about sort of the supplier comment that you made before about like really focusing on some of those suppliers, but are there other things that gems, nuggets, things people should be thinking about?
I think the most important thing is to proceed with a level of humility. If you see other people doing something and you follow them, understand that you're not necessarily putting yourself in a position to outperform. So engaging in second order thinking, I think, is crucial. In my market, I'm serving as interim COO of a third generation family owned manufacturer here in Chicago right now. And we've been retooling to produce hand sanitizer. But so are many of our competitors. So there's nothing particularly innovative about that. Our challenge is, can we attack a certain segment of users that we can serve better? Can we leverage existing relationships to find a superior distribution strategy? It's not just, aha, here's something. If the opportunity seems too easy, it probably is. That second order thinking challenges you to go above and beyond. And it's a little bit harder and it will filter out more opportunities, but the opportunities that make it through those filter are going to be that much more valuable because they're more likely to be opportunities that are unique to your set of capabilities rather than broad general opportunities that you're fighting everyone for.
Good advice. So I'm going to flip sort of the question a little bit in the sense that we have entrepreneurs on here as well. And someone asked, how would you, any suggestions that you might have for startups, specifically ones, well, let's do this in a two-part. Maybe someone asked specifically for a startup that's launching this spring, but then in general for startups in this environment.
I think my strongest advice would be focus on building a business and don't fall for the vanity metrics of valuation. If you are building a strong business that has a reason to exist and a compelling thesis, you are going to have a lot of time to build a compelling valuation. Your initial number doesn't need, it's just table stakes to get started. I think too many entrepreneurs, especially in the late stages of a boom, which we were in recently, or the early stages of a downturn when the boom is still fresh in everyone's minds, they fall too often for what someone else did, what someone else's number was. If you are building or launching a good business, it's a good business, and focus on that. And if there's a little bit more skepticism in the market, don't worry about that, because you will prove those skeptics wrong.
Good advice. And, you speak of the valuation. Should startups be thinking about capital and raising capital at this time?
There's obviously, capital is essential for any business, for many startups, because of the cash flow dynamics of those businesses. They certainly have to raise capital. But there's a great quote from Mark Andreessen. I believe it dates back to before he started Andreessen and Horowitz. Focus on building your business. Don't focus on building a pitch deck. At the end of the day, the source of the value is a compelling business that is well positioned and has attractive unit economics. And if you are building that, you will get eventually the valuation that you deserve. If you are not building that, you're very dependent on factors that you don't control.
That, I think, makes sense. I have one more question here, and I'm trying to piece it together. Someone asked, could you recommend some of the ways to make use of internally generated funds in order to stretch every dollar? I'm not sure, but if you wanted to take a stab at that.
Absolutely. And obviously, this varies by type of company, size of company, but very often business owners and entrepreneurs look outside for sources of funds. But after a certain point, companies have a lot of internal opportunities to generate capital. Now, if you're an older line manufacturer, you might invest in more of a strategy for consciously reducing your inventory. So slowing your purchasing and continuing sales so that your inventory is going down and you're generating cash flow that way. There are opportunities if you're, for instance, a business services company, where you might reach out to your key vendors at a point like this and say, listen, we've had a long and valuable relationship with you. We want to continue that. And we want you to know that though we're going to be paying you slower, we're not going to stop. And you can generate some sizable cash just by stretching your vendors a little bit. You can't do it too much, but you can do it enough to generate a $5 or $10 million top line business can generate sizable funds just stretching vendors an extra 10 or 20 days. You can also start looking at your cost structure. I know that a lot of companies with the shelter in place orders are starting to take a hard look at, what does my physical footprint need to be? Do I need as much office space as I used to have? When things get back to normal, whatever that looks like, what is the right suite of services and office footprint for me? And I think that proactive companies are really going to start looking at that and getting out of some leases and taking a hard look at who they want to be and where they want to spend money. Really scrutinize the dollars that you have already earned that you are now spending, because you control those a lot easier than new dollars coming in from a lender or an investor. And if you do that, you ironically also make yourself more attractive to those capital providers.
Yeah. I think you touched on some of what George Wu had talked a little bit about during his session on negotiations earlier this week, and speaking to suppliers, vendors,
Sure.
to be able to provide that extra bandwidth and generate those internal dollars. So that, I think that really sort of ties the two together. And if folks haven't had a chance to see George's session, I recommend looking at those as well. All the sessions from this week will be posted and available to folks. So we are actually, I think, through most of the questions from this session. And David, I wanted to, I figured we'd round out the program or event today by asking you for your final advice and anything you'd recommend for the folks that are on the live stream today.
Absolutely. The final advice is advice that I will confess that I didn't always listen to, and I remember getting it and I remember ignoring it, and I hope that some of you are wiser than me. Crises can seem all-consuming, especially when you're an entrepreneur or you're in a leadership position or both, but friends and family love you regardless, and remember to make some time for those people who love you. Usually you're doing all of this for them too. So take this opportunity, this crisis, to try to be a better person and try to be a better partner. We can be successful and good people and good partners too. It just takes a little extra effort.
Excellent advice. Thank you so much, David. We appreciate your time and some great advice and some practical steps that our business leaders and entrepreneurs can take during this very critical time. Appreciate it.
Nima, thank you so much. And thank you to the entire Polsky team.
Thanks.